The rain was drumming against the windows on the 23rd floor when Rafael Montenegro received the call that would change his life forever. At the age of 42, he had built an empire in the business consultancy sector and was recognized as one of the most respected professionals in the country. His office in downtown São Paulo was a temple of black marble and glass. Trophies and certifications covered the walls like war medals. "Mr. Montenegro?" The secretary's trembling voice snapped him out of his thoughts. "Your wife is online too," Rafael sighed, adjusting the Italian tie that had cost more than the monthly salary of many employees. For the past 3 years, his conversations with Marina had boiled down to discussions about her constant absence, her obsession with work, and her inability to show vulnerability. He considered these complaints childish after all. Everything he did was for the good of the family. "Marina, I'm in an important meeting." "I'm not anymore, Rafael." Her voice sounded strangely calm. "The divorce papers are on your desk. Isabela and I have already moved out." Rafael's world stopped. His 16-year-old daughter, his pride and joy, had left without even saying goodbye. He hung up the phone with trembling hands, but he couldn't show any weakness. Not there. Not in front of the employees who saw him as infallible. During the next meeting, Rafael maintained his impeccable posture, presenting figures and strategies with the precision of a Swiss watchmaker. Internally, however, a crack had formed in the armor of his self-confidence. For the first time in decades, he questioned whether his life model was correct. Over the next few days, Rafael plunged even deeper into work, as if professional success could compensate for the void Marina and Isabela had left behind. He closed 3 major contracts in 1 week, but returned to a silent apartment where only his own footsteps echoed. The first clue that something was terribly wrong came during a presentation to Japanese investors. Rafael, known for his photographic memory and eloquence, began to stutter. Cold sweat dripped down his forehead as the numbers he had always mastered danced confusingly in his mind. He managed to recover, but left the room knowing that something fundamental had been broken. Dr. Eduardo Ribeiro, his doctor for 15 years, got straight to the point after a battery of tests. "Rafael, you are suffering from severe burnout. Combined with episodes of acute anxiety, your body is taking the toll of years of extreme stress." "That's ridiculous," Rafael retorted, adjusting his shirt cuffs. "I've never been better. I've just closed the biggest contract in the company's history. And when was the last time you slept for 8 hours straight or had a meal?" Without thinking about work, Rafael couldn't remember. Dr. Ribeiro prescribed medication and suggested therapy. But Rafael left the office certain that doctors always exaggerate. He was strong, always had been. He didn't need psychological crutches like weak people. The second crack in his armor came when his right-hand man, Carlos, resigned after 8 years of partnership. "You've changed, Rafael. You're no longer the mentor I admired. You've become tyrannical." "Tyrannical?" Rafael laughed scornfully. "I demand excellence. If you can't keep up, it's not about pace. It's about humanity. You've lost yours." Carlos left the room, and Rafael was left alone with his trophies and his anger. How could people he had helped to grow professionally be so ungrateful? He had given them opportunities, knowledge, a bright future. And as soon as things got a little more demanding, they fled like rats from a sinking ship. That night, Rafael stayed at the office until after 2 a.m, reviewing contracts and planning strategies to replace Carlos. When he finally got home, he found a letter from Isabela on the kitchen table. It was just 2 lines, but they pierced his heart like bullets. "Dad, I love you, but I can't respect you anymore. You chose to be a stranger." For the first time in years, Rafael Montenegro, the unquestioned king of the corporate world, felt tears burn his eyes. But even alone in his empty apartment, he held them back. Kings didn't cry. Kings didn't show weakness. He didn't know that he was about to discover that his greatest strength had become his greatest curse. Rafael Montenegro's office was a physical extension of his personality, imposing, impeccable, and intimidating. Located on Avenida Faria Lima, the financial heart of São Paulo, It occupied an entire floor of a mirrored building that reflected the clouds as if defying the sky itself. Every detail had been carefully chosen to convey power and success. From the Carrara marble imported from Italy to the German leather armchairs that cost more than a popular car. Montenegro Associados wasn't just a consultancy. It was a status symbol. Large corporations paid fortunes to have Rafael analyze their strategies, and he charged every penny without blinking. His methodology, known in the market as the Montenegro Protocol, it saved dozens of companies from bankruptcy and multiplied the profits of many others. Specialized magazines regularly featured his face on their covers, always with the same calculated smile and penetrating gaze, but behind the gilded facade. Rafael's world was populated by people he had systematically driven away with his growing arrogance. Marina Montenegro, now Marina Silva again, had been a psychologist before she got married. She still remembered the young Rafael she had met at university. Ambitious, yes, but also kind and able to laugh at himself. The man she had married dreamed of helping family businesses grow, not of building a personal empire. Years of their marriage, she had tried to keep the flame of humility alive in him. But Rafael interpreted her attempts as sabotage to his professional growth. "You don't understand the pressure I'm under," he used to say when she suggested. "They spend a weekend together without talking about work. While you stay at home doing therapy with depressed housewives, I support this standard of living." The final straw was when Rafael missed Isabela's graduation because he was closing an important deal, which later turned out to be a meeting that could have been postponed. Marina realized at that moment that she had lost her husband to his ego long before she lost him to divorce. Isabela Montenegro had inherited her father's intelligence, but also her mother's sensitivity. At 16, she was one of the best students at the most expensive private school in São Paulo, but her relationship with Rafael had progressively deteriorated. She remembered when she was little, and he would take her to the office at weekends, teaching her about numbers and strategies with patience and affection. Now, conversations between father and daughter boiled down to school performance reports and demands about her academic future. Rafael had become incapable of simply asking her how she was feeling, turning every interaction into an opportunity to demonstrate his intellectual superiority. Carlos Mendoza had been the first employee, hired by Rafael when the company was still operating out of a rented room. For 8 years, he had been his loyal right-hand man, the only one capable of questioning Rafael's decisions without being fired on the spot. Carlos admitted that he had learned a lot from his boss, but he had also observed with sadness his mentor's gradual transformation into a tyrant. He used to ask our opinion on strategies. Carlos had confessed to his wife the night before he resigned. Now, if anyone disagrees with him, it's incompetent or lacks strategic vision. He doesn't realize that he's only surrounded by sycophants. The São Paulo corporate world was a peculiar ecosystem where Rafael navigated like an alpha predator. Lunches at Fasano, dinners at Dom, events at exclusive clubs. Everything served to maintain and expand his network of influence. He knew the financial secrets of the biggest companies in the country and used this knowledge as a bargaining chip for new contracts. But even in this competitive environment, some colleagues were beginning to whisper about Montenegro's growing arrogance. Executives who had previously sought him out for partnerships now hesitated, not because they questioned his competence, but because they feared his arrogance. The atmosphere at Montenegro and Associados became dense. The door to Rafael's office was closed tighter than ever, and the silence that emanated was not one of concentration, but of self-imposed isolation. The meetings, once strategic debates, became monologues where Rafael presented his conclusions and waited for nods of agreement. Any attempt to question him was met with a cold stare, dismissive smile, and sometimes a cutting comment about the other's lack of vision or fear of taking risks. "If you can't keep up," he even said to Carlos, his sleep deteriorated even more. Early mornings in the office, once a demonstration of his tireless dedication, became an escape. Rafael's mind, once an arsenal of strategies and numbers, was now a battlefield where anxious thoughts clashed with bitter memories. Isabela's letter, the 2 lines piercing his heart. "Dad, I love you, but I can't respect you anymore." You chose to be a stranger." Those words echoed louder than any customer's applause, louder than the clink of his many trophies. Rafael's health, which he had proudly ignored, began to show more glaring signs. Sporadic forgetfulness during performances previously attributed to a bad night's sleep became more frequent. Throbbing headaches accompanied him from the first cup of coffee to the last shot of whiskey. He felt a constant fatigue, an exhaustion that even the long hours of work didn't seem to relieve, but he refused to admit it. "That's ridiculous," he retorted to Dr. Eduardo Ribeiro. "I've never been better." He was strong, always had been. At the same time, Dr. Ribeiro, worried, tried to approach him in other ways. He called, sent messages. Rafael ignored them or replied with evasive answers, always reaffirming his excellent health. "Everything is under control, Eduardo. Just the normal rhythm of a successful businessman." Rafael's refusal to accept help, the certainty that he was strong and didn't need psychological crutches like weak people, created an ever-widening chasm between him and any possibility of a cure. In the office, Carlos's departure triggered a wave of silent apprehension. Employees looked at each other warily, measuring their words before addressing Rafael. Productivity, paradoxically, increased, not out of inspiration, but out of fear. No one wanted to be the next to face the wrath of the Glass King. The nickname, previously restricted to the circles of the most daring executives, began to circulate in the corridors of the company itself, whispered between the teeth over quick coffees and furtive glances. It was a cruel irony. He had built a glass company, transparent in its opulence, but his personality was becoming increasingly opaque and unbreakable on the outside, yet fragile on the inside. A new crisis arose when a long-standing client, the company Horizonte Digital, which Rafael had helped restructure years before, terminated its contract. The reason given was communication difficulties and the inflexibility of Montenegro and Rafael exploded. "Inflexibility? I pulled them off the canvas. They wouldn't have got where they are without the Montenegro Protocol." He refused to see that the Montenegro Protocol was effective, but its application was now dictatorial. What was once confidence that his model was the best had become arrogance that only he knew the way. With no room for adaptations or the opinions of others, news of the breakup spread like a virus in the market. Other companies began to reevaluate their contracts, to consider Rafael's reputation, not just for his competence, but for his temperament. Whispers about Montenegro's growing arrogance gained volume and turned into open conversations at lunches and social events. Rafael's isolation, which he had previously seen as a demonstration of his superiority, was now proving to be a strategic flaw. He refused to talk, to listen to feedback, to admit any flaws in his vision. That evening, alone in his apartment, Rafael picked up the phone and, on an impulse, dialed Marina's number. He hadn't heard from her for weeks. Her voice answered, carrying a coldness that cut deeper than the blade of a knife. "Rafael, there's nothing to talk about," he tried to argue, to explain his exhaustion, the pressure. But the words wouldn't come out, trapped in his throat by a dam of pride. I'm just calling to see how Isabela is," he managed to say. In a last-ditch effort to achieve a minimum of connection, Marina hesitated. "Isabela's fine. She's learning to play the guitar. It's a shame you've never had time for such things." The line went silent. The mention of Isabela, of something so intimate and personal that he had neglected, struck him like a bolt of lightning. What was there in his mind that prevented him from being the father she deserved, the husband Marina hoped for? The answer, however, was still obscured by a thick fog of denial. The silence of the apartment returned, more deafening than ever, and the Glass King felt the crack in his armor deepen, threatening the very fabric of his existence. The game was about to change, and Rafael still had no idea how to play it without his old rules. As Rafael's professional and personal crisis deepened, subplots began to emerge, revealing the complexity of his world and the web of relationships he had neglected. The first of these centered on Marina and Isabela, who, far from the oppressive shadow of Rafael's pride, were trying to rebuild their lives. Marina, now free to focus on herself, reactivated her old psychology clinic. She sought not just an income, but a renewed purpose. Her sessions with patients suffering from stress and anxiety, ironically, problems that Rafael stubbornly ignored, made her reflect on her own marriage. She now realized with painful clarity that the Rafael she had loved had been buried under layers of unbridled ambition and a pride, so vast that it left no room for anything else. In one of the sessions, a patient vented about a workaholic husband, and Marina felt a shiver run down her spine. It was a vision of her own past, and Isabela's pain at the hands of an absent father, which kept her firm in her decision to divorce. Isabela, for her part, found refuge in music. The guitar lessons that Marina had briefly mentioned to Rafael became her sanctuary. Each chord, each melody, was a way of expressing the confusion, anger, and sadness she felt towards her father. She remembered the moments when he taught her about numbers and strategies, and the pain of no longer having that connection was palpable. Isabela began composing small pieces, turning her pain into art, a stark contrast to the way Rafael dealt with his own emotions by repressing them. One afternoon, watching the news about the crisis at Montenegro and Associados, she felt a mixture of sadness and a strange release. Her father's fallen away was the fall of the facade that was suffocating her. A second subplot was unfolding within Montenegro and Associados itself. When Carlos left, a young manager called Lucas Viana emerged as a promising talent. Lucas was bright, ambitious, and unlike Rafael, empathetic. He watched the decaying work environment with concern and secretly began to consolidate a small team of disgruntled but competent employees who shared his vision of a more collaborative and less hierarchical consultancy. They met after work, exchanging ideas and finding solutions to problems that Rafael, in his prideful blindness, ignored. Lucas knew that a direct confrontation with Rafael would be suicidal. Strategy was to build a solid base, a plan B, in case the company really collapsed. He saw Rafael's pride not just as a personal flaw, but as an existential threat to the company itself. The final subplot revolved around Dr. Eduardo Ribeiro. Concerned about Rafael's health and unable to break through his friend's wall of denial, Eduardo began to talk informally with colleagues in the corporate world. He inquired about the level of stress and burnout among top executives, trying to understand if Rafael's case was a symptom of a bigger problem in São Paulo's business environment. In these conversations, Eduardo noticed Rafael's shadow lengthening. Whispers of the Glass King's arrogance reached his ears, and he connected the dots. Rafael's health was declining because of a problem that was not just physiological, but deeply psychological. He considered contacting Marina, but hesitated, respecting their privacy. However, Rafael's situation led him to study the relationship between corporate stress and personality disorders in greater depth, providing him with knowledge that he hoped could one day be used to help his friend. If he finally allowed himself to be helped, each of these subplots, although at first glance peripheral, was intrinsically linked to Rafael's pride and its consequences. Marina and Isabela's pain was a direct reflection of his absence and inflexibility. Lucas's silent conspiracy in the company was a response to his tyranny. Eduardo's search for answers was an echo of his refusal to accept his own vulnerability. The web was tightening, and Rafael, still trapped in his ivory tower, was about to feel the weight of each thread. The glass castle, so imposing on the outside, was beginning to reveal the cracks in its structure, and the ground beneath its foundations was becoming unstable. The next tremor would be even more devastating, the crack that would finally break. Through Rafael's facade came not from a great corporate catastrophe, but from an eerie silence. A series of events, previously ignored or attributed to the envy of others, converged on an inescapable truth. The first was the loss of $1 million contract with a multinational that, at the last minute, opted for a less experienced competitor. The reason? Lack of cultural alignment and feedback on leadership style. The multinational's manager explained to his assistant with a tone of regret. On being informed, just grunted and demanded a review of all the competitors' proposals, convinced that there was some foul play going on. His pride prevented him from seeing the obvious truth. Rafael's health has also reached a new level of alarm. On a Monday afternoon, during a crucial meeting with investors, Rafael suffered a severe panic attack. His heart raced, he ran out of air and collapsed in his chair, unable to utter a single word. The despair in his eyes, an image he had never allowed anyone to see, was exposed. The shocked investors abruptly ended the meeting. It was the moment when the previously impenetrable armor cracked in public. He felt completely vulnerable. Something that, for Rafael, was synonymous with failure. It was Dr. Eduardo Ribeiro who found him in the room, panting and pale. "Rafael, it's burnout, it's anxiety. Your body has been screaming for help for years and you refuse to listen." Eduardo took him to hospital. The battery of tests revealed nothing physically serious, but the medical team was unanimous. Rafael needed urgent psychological help. However, he still tried to convince himself that it was just tiredness. Just to scare Eduardo, overworked. Eduardo looked at him sadly. "No, Rafael, it's your pride that's killing you." Eduardo's sentence resounded in his mind like a cracked bell. "Your pride is killing you." In the hospital, alone in the sterile white room, without the glamour of his office or the noise of Feria Lima, Rafael finally began to deconstruct the wall he had erected. The image of Marina, serene and firm in her decision, Isabela's voice, saying that she could no longer respect him, Carlos's loyalty, now lost, the whispers about his arrogance, the loss of the contract with Horizonte Digital. Everything converged on a single, painful truth. A turning point came when he picked up his cell phone and saw a notification. A photo that Isabela had posted on her social networks. It was her, smiling, with her guitar on her lap, next to Marina, both in a charming cafe. In the caption, Isabela had written, "Finding the melody of peace alongside those who teach me how to be truly strong." The photo wasn't for him. It was a glimpse of a life that went on without him. A life of affection and vulnerability that he had sacrificed on the altar of his self-sufficiency. Those words, "who teaches me to be really strong," were not an attack, but a realization. And the strength Isabela was referring to was not that of a built empire, but that of emotional resilience, of the ability to open up and heal. At that instant, a fragment of the Glass King broke inside. It wasn't an explosion, but a silent, painful imploding. He realized that his strength, the refusal to ask for help, the belief in his infallibility, the disregard for emotions was not strength, but the root of his problem, the pride that had isolated him and brought him to the brink. The fall of the Glass King was not about the ruin of his empire, but about the ruin of his soul. Caused by a self-sufficiency that had become a curse, Rafael saw himself in the mirror of the hospital room. The man staring back at him was not the Rafael Montenegro of the magazine covers, but an exhausted being with deep circles under his eyes and an empty stare. He remembered the discussion with Marina, her complaints about his constant absence, his obsession with work, and his inability to show vulnerability. He considered these complaints childish after all. Everything he did was for the good of the family. In his phrase to Carlos, "I demand excellence. If you can't keep up..." For the first time in decades, Rafael didn't adjust his imaginary tie. He didn't try to look infallible. He allowed fragility to take over. He felt weak, small, but paradoxically, it was at this point of vulnerability that a seed of hope began to sprout. The pain was immense, but the clarity was a balm. Dr. Ribeiro's diagnosis. Severe burnout combined with acute anxiety episodes was no longer an accusation, but a starting point. He needed to change. Not for his company, not for his image, but for himself, and perhaps to have a chance of reconnecting with the people who mattered most. The armor was finally in pieces. Rafael's panic attack at the investors' meeting reverberated not only in his conscience, but throughout the São Paulo financial market. The news, like fire and dry straw, spread through the corridors of large corporations over lunch at Fasano. And through the WhatsApp chats of executives, the Glass King had crumbled, and the image of his invincibility, once so solid, was now in pieces. The consequences were not long in coming. The multinational that had canceled Rafael's contract was not the only one. Within a few days, two more important clients, which accounted for almost 20% of Montenegro and Associados' turnover, announced the termination of their agreements, citing uncertainties about the stability of leadership and reputational problems. Rafael felt a significant financial blow, but the greater pain was public humiliation. His pride, now crushed, tried to rise again with thoughts of revenge and crazy plans to win back clients. But the truth was that he was at a loss. Inside Montenegro and Associados, the atmosphere of apprehension turned to despair. Lucas Viana, who had previously acted discreetly, saw the opportunity to move his pieces. He called secret meetings with the team he had co-opted, and the buzz about a possible stampede of talent to the competition grew stronger. The loyalty of the employees, previously won by the prestige of the company, was now fading in the face of the fragility of their leader. Some resigned, others were just waiting for the chance to jump ship. The company was on the verge of collapse. Dr. Eduardo Ribeiro, for his part, took advantage of Rafael's momentary vulnerability to try a more incisive approach. He visited him in hospital, not as a doctor, but as a friend. "Rafael, you need to stop. Not just from work, but from this war against yourself. You've become a slave to your own image, to your own pride. And this has isolated you from everything and everyone that really matters." Eduardo didn't offer ready-made solutions, but insisted on therapy, on the need for Rafael to face the roots of his problem. "You've built an empire, but you've lost yourself in the process." Rafael's reaction to Eduardo's intervention was, at first, resistance. He was still trying to rationalize, to minimize. "Don't be dramatic, Eduardo. It was just a bout of stress." But Eduardo's words, added to the deafening silence of his apartment and the emptiness left by Marina and Isabela, began to penetrate his hardened shell. He had lost control, he had failed, and the only way to get back on his feet would not be with more work or more arrogance, but with a humility he didn't know he possessed. It was then that Rafael went to see Marina for the first time in years, not with the intention of reversing the divorce, but to seek an understanding. The call was brief and full of uncomfortable silences. He apologized awkwardly for his faults. Marina, surprised by the change of tone, listened cautiously. "Rafael, I always wanted you to see that you could see yourself beyond the numbers and titles." She showed no emotion, but allowed a small thread of hope to emerge at the end of the conversation. "Isabela is giving a guitar recital next week. It would be good for her if you went." The mention of Isabela's recital was a powerful trigger. Rafael knew it wouldn't be the same old professional appearance to make a point. It would be a genuine attempt to reconnect. The idea of going to a public event and showing his vulnerability, his flaw, still terrified him. But the image of Isabela with her guitar, finding the melody of peace alongside the one who teaches her how to be truly strong, drove him on. He had to try, not out of pride, but out of love. The Glass King stood naked before the mirror, and the image reflected was no longer that of an unshakable monarch, but that of a broken man in search of redemption. The journey of coming to terms with his pride was just beginning, and the reactions of the world around him served as a painful but necessary reminder of the urgency of his transformation. Rafael's decision to go to Isabela's guitar recital was the first faltering and uncertain step in his journey to overcome his pride. It wasn't easy. On the night of the event, the old armor of pride was trying to rebuild itself. The idea of being seen in such a personal setting without the control and grandeur of his office made him vulnerable. He considered giving up several times, but the image of Isabela, with her guitar and serene smile, and the persistent pain of Marina's words about real strength, drove him on. Arriving at the school auditorium, he hesitated at the door. The place was full of fathers, mothers, and grandparents, all with looks full of affection and expectation. Rafael felt like a stranger, an imposter. He found an empty seat at the back in an attempt to go unnoticed. When Isabela came on stage, her eyes traveled around the audience and fixed on him for a moment, a look of surprise, perhaps incredulity. Before she adjusted her guitar and began to play, the melody Isabela played was soft and melancholy, but with notes of surprising resilience. It was her own composition. Rafael for the first time in years. Didn't think about numbers, contracts, or strategies. He just listened. And as the notes filled the air, images of his life with Isabela since childhood flashed through his mind, the few moments of pure joy and laughter that he had crushed under the weight of his ambition. The song spoke of a subtle pain, of a love that persisted despite abandonment. At the end of the song, tears, which he had held back for so long, flowed freely down his face. He couldn't hold them back. There was no one to judge. It was just a father, broken, listening to his daughter's soul. After the recital, Rafael waited for the crowd to thin out before approaching Isabela. She saw him, and the surprise on her face gave way to caution. "Dad." He hugged her, an awkward hug, but full of an emotion he couldn't put into words. "Your music? It's beautiful, daughter." His voice was broken. Isabela, for the first time in a long time, felt a sense of relief. It was the first time she had seen her father truly vulnerable. He apologized, not with lame apologies, but with the humility of someone who recognized a deep mistake. "I'm sorry, Isabela." Everything. I was blind. The conversation with Isabela was a watershed. She didn't forgive him immediately, but accepted his apology and his attempt to reconnect. She suggested that he see Dr. Ana Lucia, a therapist Marina had recommended and whom she herself already knew. It was a significant step. Had previously ridiculed therapy, now considered it a lifeline. He booked his first session with Dr. Ana Lucia the following day. The therapy sessions were brutally honest. Rafael, used to controlling all the narratives, found himself in an environment where he was forced to expose his weaknesses. Dr. Ana Lucia didn't flatter him. She confronted him with the root of his problem, the pathological pride that prevented him from accepting help, from seeing others as equals, from recognizing his own shortcomings. "Rafael, you've built a king in your mind who doesn't cry, doesn't make mistakes, doesn't need anyone. But that king is made of glass and it's shattering and you're trapped inside." He talked about the business, the losses, the burnout, and Dr. Ana Lucia patiently guided him back to the central point. How pride prevented him from seeing that burnout was a consequence of his refusal to delegate and trust that client losses were the result of his inability to listen. That estrangement from his family was the price of his self-sufficiency. With each session, Rafael felt layers of his armor coming off. He began to admit that he wasn't infallible, that he needed help. He read books on emotional intelligence, stress management, and even parenting. He started practicing meditation at his therapist's suggestion, something the Glass King would never have imagined doing. The process was painful but liberating. He was learning to be human again. This change began to be reflected in the workplace. Instead of blowing up at the team, Rafael started to listen. He called Lucas Viana in for a one-on-one meeting, not to make demands, but to ask for his honest opinion on the company's situation. Lucas, surprised by the change, exposed the team's frustrations and the flaws in management. Rafael to Lucas, surprise, listened attentively, without interrupting, without disdain. He apologized for his behavior and asked for Lucas' help to turn the situation around. He was no longer the Glass King dictating orders, but a leader seeking collaboration. It was a small but monumental step towards reconstruction. The journey of overcoming and growing was in full swing, and the future, although uncertain, no longer looked so bleak. Pride was being overcome not by brute force, but by humble acceptance of its weaknesses. With the acceptance of his vulnerability, Rafael began to move differently, although the road was still arduous. The improvement in his burnout, although gradual, was noticeable. The headache subsided, sleep began to return, and the mental fog that had accompanied him for years began to dissipate. He still had his moments of relapse, of trying to hide behind his old persona, but Dr. Ana Lucia guided him firmly, always reminding him of the cost of his pride. "Rafael, you are becoming a master of the art of denial, but your body and mind are refusing to be your accomplices." The relationship with Isabela, spurred on by the guitar and the tears at the recital, took small steps. He began to accompany her to some lessons, not to supervise, but to learn. He would sit next to her, clumsily, trying to understand the chords, and ask her to teach him. Isabela, reluctant at first, noticed her father's genuine attempt to connect. Their conversations became lighter, less about demands and more about common interests. And Rafael discovered a dimension of his daughter that he had never explored. One day, she presented him with a simple piece of sheet music, a melody she had composed with no lyrics, just notes. "It's for you, Dad, for you to find your own melody." Isabela's song, once an outpouring of her pain, became an invitation to healing. At Montenegro and Associados, the dynamic began to change. Rafael surprisingly opened up to Lucas Viana. Together, they reviewed the client loss reports, and Rafael, for the first time, admitted the errors of his management. "I was blind, Lucas. My pride prevented me from seeing that the problem wasn't them, it was me." This confession, something unthinkable coming from the former Rafael, shocked Lucas but also inspired him. He saw a real opportunity to rebuild the company, not along the old lines, but in a more collaborative way. Lucas, armed with this new openness, proposed a radical restructuring plan, focused not only on winning back customers, but on restoring the company's internal culture. He suggested the creation of a collaborative innovation committee, where employees at all levels could contribute ideas without the censorship of an autocratic boss. Rafael hesitated. His pride, which still lived in his bones, whispered about the loss of control, about the dilution of his authority. But Dr. Ana Luce's words, "You need to learn to delegate and trust," and the image of Isabela learning to play the guitar with a humility he had never experienced, made him give in. First, Collaborative Innovation Committee was a litmus test for Rafael. He sat back and listened. Employees previously intimidated now presented their ideas, their frustrations, and surprisingly innovative solutions. Rafael didn't correct, he didn't criticize. He simply asked questions and, at the end, thanked everyone, publicly acknowledging the value of each contribution. It was an unprecedented scene at Montenegro and Associados. The change wasn't immediate, but the seed of collaboration had been planted. Meanwhile, Dr. Eduardo Ribeiro's subplot became even more intertwined with Rafael's. Eduardo, sensing his friend's genuine attempt to change, suggested a more far-reaching event. A talk for executives on the importance of mental and emotional health in the corporate environment. With a focus on burnout and the personality vices that lead to it. Rafael, you have a powerful story of warning and redemption. Can help many others not to make the same mistakes. The idea terrified Rafael at first. Exposing his weaknesses in public? Tell his story of his fall? The old Rafael would have dismissed the proposal as absurd and humiliating. But the new Rafael, the one who was learning to embrace his vulnerability, saw an opportunity for redemption and purpose. It wouldn't be to reaffirm his image, but to use his experience as a tool of transformation for others. The talk was scheduled for a few weeks from now at one of São Paulo's largest convention centers. It was Rafael's chance to confront his pride head-on, in front of everyone who had once idolized him and now viewed him with suspicion. The stage was set for the climax of his journey. The day of the lecture arrived, and with it, an avalanche of anxiety. Rafael felt the old stage fright, the one that drove him to be flawless. But this time, it felt different. It wasn't the fear of failing in front of others, but the fear of failing himself, of not being able to be honest, of letting pride rear its ugly head. In the dressing room, before entering, he mentally went over Dr. Ana Lucia's words. Be yourself, Rafael, the real you, with your weaknesses and your renewed strength. The convention center was packed. Executives, businessmen, and even a few journalists were present, curious to see the King of Glass in his new version. Many knew him, some admired him, others viewed him with suspicion. The lights were dazzling, and as Rafael took to the stage, he felt a lump in his throat. He took a deep breath, trying to control the trembling in his hands. Good evening, everyone, Rafael began, his voice a little hoarse but firm. I'm Rafael Montenegro, and many of you know me as the founder of Montenegro and Associados, the creator of the Montenegro Protocol, the King of Glass. The mention of his nickname generated a murmur from the audience. He paused, staring at a distant point. Today, I'm not here to talk about success, business strategies, or how to build empires. He swallowed. I'm here to talk about the fall. My fall. He began to narrate his journey, not with the pomp of a consultant, but with the raw honesty of a man in recovery. He talked about the incessant search for more, the obsession with work, the sacrifice of his family. He described the divorce, the letter from Isabela that pierced his heart like bullets, the departure of Carlos, his right-hand man who saw him as tyrannical, the panic attacks, the diagnosis of severe burnout. Every word was a piece of his old armor that he threw down, exposing the living flesh. I believed that being strong meant never showing weakness, Rafael continued, his voice gaining more confidence. That being a leader meant having all the answers, never needing anyone. I believed that my pride was my greatest strength, God, but it became my greatest curse. You remember Dr. Eduardo Ribeiro's words, "It's your pride that's killing you." In a moment of striking vulnerability, Rafael projected a photo of Isabela and Marina that he had seen on his cell phone onto the screen. "This is my daughter Isabela and my ex-wife Marina. A few months ago I saw this photo and Isabela had written, 'Finding the melody of peace alongside those who teach me to be truly strong.' I realized at that moment that real strength doesn't lie in building walls but in breaking them down." He described the decision to go to Isabela's recital, tears he allowed to flow, in the first honest conversation he had with her. He talked about the beginning of therapy, the brutally honest sessions, and how Dr. Anna Luche confronted him with the root of his problem, pathological pride. I learned that I wasn't infallible, that I needed help. It was the hardest and most liberating thing I've ever done in my life. Rafael went on to explain the changes at Montenegro and Associados, the creation of the Collaborative Innovation Committee, the openness to listening to the team. He invited Lucas Viana on stage, and together they presented a new business plan, focused on collaboration, empathy, and the mental health of employees. It was no longer the Montenegro Protocol as a dictatorial manual, but as a flexible guide, open to everyone's contribution. The audience applauded, not out of obligation, but out of genuine recognition of the transformation. The fall of the Glass King wasn't my undoing, Rafael concluded, his eyes teary but a slight smile on his lips. It was my salvation. I lost a lot, but I gained something much more valuable, myself. And I'm learning that true strength lies in accepting your vulnerability and asking for help, in reconnecting with the people you love. My problem, which dragged on for years, was my pride. And the solution only came when I had the humility to face it and try to change it. At the end of the talk, the applause was deafening. Many in the audience were teary-eyed. Executives stood up, some with tears in their eyes, recognizing their own struggles. The Glass King had shattered his own image, and in doing so had become, paradoxically, stronger than ever. It wasn't the power of an empire, but the resilience of a human being who had finally allowed himself to be real. After the lecture, the life of Rafael Montenegro, the former King of Glass, continued on a path of transformation. Now paved with the humility and authenticity he had finally embraced, Montenegro and Associados, once on the verge of collapse, began a slow but promising rebuilding process. The leadership shared with Lucas Viana brought new energy to the company. The Collaborative Innovation Committee proved to be a success, generating innovative ideas and, most importantly, restoring the team's confidence and morale. Rafael learned to delegate, to trust, to value everyone's contributions, not just his own. The company regained some of its old clients and won over new ones, attracted by its new working philosophy, and ironically, by its founder's story of redemption. His relationship with Isabela blossomed. Guitar lessons became a weekly ritual, a sacred space where father and daughter reconnected through music. Rafael began to attend recitals, not as an absent father, but as a proud and participative spectator. The score Isabela had given him, the melody to find your own melody, became a constant reminder of their journey. Didn't make up for lost time, but they built a new, more solid and true foundation for their relationship. The bridge with Marina also began to be restored. It wasn't a return to marriage, but a mutual respect. Marina, seeing the genuine change in Rafael, allowed a more peaceful and even friendly coexistence, always focused on Isabela's well-being. They began to have civilized conversations about their daughter and Rafael for the first time. Asked Marina for advice on parenting and emotional issues, valuing her experience as a psychologist and mother. The coldness that had previously marked their interactions gave way to courtesy and, occasionally, a glimmer of the old friendship that had united them. Dr. Eduardo Ribeiro continued to be a pillar of support, not just as a doctor, but as a friend. Their conversations became deeper, exchanging not just medical advice, reflections on life, human nature, and the importance of mental health in an increasingly demanding world. Eduardo, in turn, began to use Rafael's story as a case study in his lectures on burnout and well-being in the corporate environment. Always with his friend's permission and encouragement, Rafael never went back to being the Glass King. Armor had been broken, and, in its place, a more complete, more human man emerged. He was still ambitious, yes, but his ambition was now anchored in values of collaboration, empathy, and self-knowledge. He understood that the problem that had haunted him for years, loneliness, burnout, estrangement from his family, was a direct consequence of his inordinate pride. And the solution to all these ills lay not in conquering more, but in stripping away his own arrogance and embracing humility. The fall of the Glass King was, in fact, the rise of Rafael, the man. Years later, Rafael Montenegro watched the sunset. From the balcony of his apartment, which was now alive with laughter and the melody of Isabela's guitar, Montenegro and Associados was thriving, but in a different, more humane and sustainable way. He still spoke occasionally, telling his story, no longer as a performance of strength, but as a testimony of vulnerability and redemption. The scar of pride was there, a constant reminder, but now it was a scar of healing, not an open wound. He was Rafael, the man, no longer the Glass King. Rafael Montenegro's story is a mirror. It invites us to look inwards and question, what is the glass that prevents us from being full? What pride isolates us? If you like Rafael, feel the weight of an armor that suffocates you, know that true strength lies in breaking it. Seek help. Listen to your body and mind. Reconnect with those you love. Transformation is possible, and the fall can actually be the beginning of your most powerful ascent. Start building your own melody of peace today. And if this story has touched you, leave a like, subscribe to the channel for more reflections like this, and share your own experiences in the comments. Your journey could inspire many others.